And so today I have titled this message, An Overwhelming Outbreak. And so the outbreak I'm going to talk about isn't COVID or natural disasters or politics or wars or anything like that. It's simply just in the name, an outbreak in our own personal lives of when we feel overwhelmed. When overwhelm begins to attack us and stress us out, and we get anxious and we lose control and what that does. And so for my wife and I, also as Ron mentioned, we're on the verge of being very overwhelmed day in and day out. We're so close to having a baby. People are raising their hands. I don't know if that's the emotion that I'm feeling right now, that type of celebration. But realizing that we're going to have another human to take care of every day is a pretty overwhelming feeling for us. We've replaced the flooring in our house. We've decorated a nursery. We've painted furniture. We've moved furniture. I think we've probably bought just about every baby item Amazon has in stock. And for some reason, I still get this feeling that no matter how much we buy, how much we change, how much we paint, we're probably not going to be fully prepared for when that day comes. And everyone's smiling and they're like, no, you're not. And I get that. And so that is a pretty overwhelming feeling. And so anytime we're so close right now, we're like almost 39 weeks, and anytime Alicia makes like an abnormal grunt or a cough or she sneezes or she touches her stomach at the grocery store, I like get really close to her and I'm like, I just put my iPhone in panic mode. I have an ambulance on standby. Are we having contractions? Are we going into labor? Is this labor or are we having Braxton Hicks right now? You said you have to go to the bathroom. Did your water break? And she's always like, relax. Like, you'd know if I was going into labor, I'm miserable right now. And although I can accept what's about to happen, I can't truly understand it. And that's pretty overwhelming. And for many of us, we've been on this journey before. Some of us might not have been on this journey before. But all of us have felt overwhelmed in our lives. Currently, we're walking through a really unprecedented time between pandemics and wars, natural disasters. Maybe you've sent your babies off to college, or maybe they're going into high school, or maybe they just started driving, and that's really overwhelming as well. And so we all can connect with being overwhelmed. We all have an awareness of what that feels like, but what do we do with it if we don't have the tools? Or how do we get the tools for that? And so I'm going to talk to you out of 1 Kings, starting in chapter 19, the story of Elijah the prophet, the Tishbite from Tishbe. I practiced that a lot so that I wouldn't mess it up. And so I just want to tell you about the end of chapter 18, because we're going to be starting in chapter 19. And at the end of chapter 18, Elijah returns to Ahab and Jezebel, and he tells them that he needs to challenge the prophets of Baal, that the Lord is displeased that they are worshiping the prophets of Baal. And so he says, we're going to go up on this holy mountain. We're going to build 2 altars. We're going to build my altar for God into the ground, and then you're going to build your altar. You're going to go first because I'm really nice, and you're going to call out to Baal, and he's going to light your altar. And whoever lights their altar first wins. And so the prophets of Baal begin to scream, and they chant, and they dance around, and at one point they even start to cut themselves and spill their blood on the altar. And then Elijah starts to taunt them, saying, hey, yell louder, maybe Baal's asleep. Maybe he's on vacation, maybe he's traveling. Yell louder, scream louder. And then at one point he says, it's my turn. He tells them, go get 4 large jars of water and pour it on the altar. And do it again. And then he says, do it a 3rd time. And by this time there's so much water on the altar that it's overflowing. Elijah prays to God, and God rains down fire and lights the altar. And then he seizes the prophets of Baal and he slaughters them. And then now we're going to start in chapter 19. It says, Ahab told Jezebel that everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, may the gods punish me and do so severely. If I don't make your life like one of them by this time tomorrow. Then Elijah became afraid, immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there. But he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers. He lay down and slept under the broom tree. Suddenly an angel touched him. The angel told him, get up and eat. Then he looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time and touched him. He said, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." So he got up, he ate, he drank. Then on the strength from that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. He entered a cave there and spent the night. Suddenly the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So Elijah finishes this series of miracles, this powerful series of miracles against the prophet of Baal and against Ahab and Jezebel. And then right after that, Jezebel threatens his life. And Ahab and Jezebel in our history are probably two of the most heinous, ruthless king and queen combo we've ever seen. And so immediately Elijah becomes afraid. He becomes overwhelmed, and rightfully so. So he begins to run, and he runs into the wilderness so scared, so overwhelmed that he says, "I would rather die than live with this fear. I'd rather die than be this overwhelmed. Take my life." And then right after that, God sent angels to provide for him. So Elijah continues for 40 days, 40 nights, and he resides in a cave on Horeb. And we'll get back to that in a second. But really quick, I just want to ask you, if I were to come to your house, and put a blindfold on you, and don't be weird about this. This is something that is common for pastors to do. They come to your house, they put blindfolds on you. And I were to come, and I would say, "Take me through your home." If you've lived in your house for a long time, you would probably have a pretty good idea of where you're at. With a blindfold on, you could probably take me to your bedroom, take me to your nightstand, show me where your bathroom is without seeing where you're at. But then now, if I brought you to my home, and I put a blindfold on you, and I said, "Walk 10 steps forward and open my front door," you would be able to get to the front door, and then after that, you wouldn't really know where you were at. And then if I said, "Okay, watch out for the stairs, find the bathroom, and help me find my keys," you would be met with this overwhelming sense of unknown. Because you wouldn't know if you're going to run into a wall at some point. I didn't tell you if the stairs were downstairs or upstairs. You have no guidance beyond that front door, beyond what you knew. And so now you've lost control over a situation that you originally felt like you had control over. And that hits us with very overwhelming unknown. And so when Alicia and I were first married, my grandpa passed away. And my grandpa was just about everything to me. He was my guidance, he was my guiding light, he was my advice. And when he died, I was hit with this overwhelming unknown because I didn't know where I would go after that. How can I go on without that guidance? How can I go on without that knowledge, that advice, that person in my life? And then we become unhinged by the unknown. I hope you like my first dad pun. That's the first one in the history because we were talking about doors, and now we're unhinged. I think you missed it, but that's okay. We are unhinged by the unknown, and when we're unhinged, it begins to create tension in us because we're so overwhelmed with the things that we can't control. The things that we fight so hard to regain control over, to keep control over, to hold on to, even though we know and we're overwhelmed by the fact that we can't hold on to them. And so we're going to look back at Elijah and how he struggled with feeling overwhelmed and not having that control back in 1 Kings 19:10 through 13. And it says, he replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, God of armies, but..." I tried to do that really smooth and it didn't work, sorry. "But the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are looking for me to take my life." Then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence." At that moment, the Lord passed by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and shattering cliffs before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a voice, a soft whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And so I feel like this moment in Elijah's story, this moment in Elijah's history is a very human moment for him. For being one of the greatest figures of faith in the Bible, one of the greatest prophets in the Bible, this strikes me as very human because he says, "I have served you. I've loved you. I've followed your commands. I've lived out your covenant. I have been zealous in serving you. I've preached your word. I've intersected on your behalf. I've helped perform your miracles and live out your covenant, but they're too evil. What do you want from me? What do you expect from me? I'm human. And sometimes it's really easy to forget that these people were just like us. And so there's this moment in Alicia and I's marriage where I connected with this feeling that Elijah has because I was overwhelmed. 4 years ago in October of this year, we will have moved out here. And we moved out here with 30 days notice because she got a job at KDRV. So everyone should watch Newswatch 12, KDRV, 4 and 5. So we moved out here, and we didn't have much, but we had too much because we couldn't find a house or an apartment. So we got a trailer from Alicia's parents and decided to live in this trailer. We sold just about everything we had, started driving out here. This is another reason I'm scared to be a dad. We started driving out here with no place to live. We were calling places as we were driving out here, hoping that by the time we got here, they would have an opening for our trailer. So that's great. And then on top of that, we had no money, $0. So there's this moment where winter had just started to set in Trail, which Trail is far out there if you know of it. And it was getting really cold. Alicia was at work. I was doing odd jobs, trying to shoe horses and things like that. And there's this moment where we came home, and we were like, it's really cold in this trailer. And then we were like, let's cook some ramen, because that's all we could afford. And then the oven wouldn't come on. And we found out that we were out of propane, and like I said, no money. So I had to call my brother. And it's always weird how God does this to you, where you practice this 100 times, and you don't ever get emotional, and then you get up here and you start talking it, and then you get emotional. I had to call my brother and talk to him. So he answers. He's really excited, and he says, hey, how's Oregon? How is it out there? Are you having fun? Is it beautiful? And I immediately just started sobbing and just saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. And being my older brother and the guy he is, he just says, don't be sorry. Don't be afraid. Like, it's okay. And I think I asked him for like $50, and I thought I was asking for like $5 million. And he immediately gave it to me. We got propane, and we ate our ramen for that night. And then when Alicia went to sleep, I can remember sitting up and thinking, just like Elijah in this moment, God, I prayed to you about this. I felt your call. You answered us. Alicia and I knew this is where you wanted to go. I've been zealous for you. I've lived my life for you. I've worked for you. I've strived my best to walk in holiness for you. Why is this happening to us? What do you want from me? So this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible because I love this moment between God and Elijah. These supernatural events surround Elijah, incredible disasters, a wind that shatters cliffs, an earthquake that tears open the grounds, a fire upon the trees. And in none of those huge, powerful, amazing things was God. Until there was this gentle wind, this soft whisper. And when I imagine this moment, I always imagine it as a gentle breeze that touches Elijah's chest and then almost directly pierces his heart. What are you doing here, Elijah? And so I was in the shower the other day, and then I'm just getting back into the mess. What if I did that? What if it just went right back into it, and you're like, why do you say the thing about the shower? But I was in the shower the other day, and have you ever been in the shower? Middle school boys, a shower is where you use water and soap to wash your body. Your leaders and I would appreciate if you did this every week. Actually, preferably every day. But you're in the shower, and you have a bar of soap, and you're just washing away. You're singing to Garth Brooks. I hope it's Garth Brooks. If it's not, you're not allowed in Oklahoma. And then you're not paying attention, and all of a sudden, you squeeze the soap too hard, and it just shoots out of your hand, you know? And then you go to catch it with your other hand, and you squeeze it too hard again, and then it's just shooting out of your hand, and back and forth, and you don't know what to do. And I say all this to recognize that when I was thinking about this in the shower, because that's where I write most of my sermons, that the same way we lost possession of the bar of soap is the same way we try to get it back. The same way we lose something is the same way we try to get control of it. So what are you holding on to too much or too tightly that's holding you back too much? This feeling of control, these times of overwhelm comes from our need, our unwillingness to let go of something that we know we should get rid of. And because of our unwillingness to let go of it, it's unrelenting in holding on to us. And so I had a great mentor in high school, my high school youth pastor. He married Alicia and I. He loved Alicia and I. He is basically the sole purpose, the sole reason I'm standing up here talking to you today, the reason I love your kids. I hang out with your kids. And then there came a time where he had some big moral failures. Shortly into Alicia and I's marriage, some huge moral failures. And as time goes on, things begin to get darker and darker and darker. And I tried to hold on to that relationship with this person as hard as I could. I placed more value in that relationship with my high school youth pastor than I probably place in my relationship with God. I was 21 and I would drive 3 hours 3 times a week to go see him, thinking that if I held on to it tight enough, I could bring him back to God. I could reconcile him. He mentored me in high school, and now it's my turn to mentor this 40-year-old guy. And I held on to it because I made him become my God. I could control pieces of that relationship. I wanted to control the last remnants of that relationship, even though deep in the depths of my pain and my brokenness, I know that there's coming a time where, keep in mind, this guy was my literal everything. Literally. He was so much to me, so much that when this happened, I would hide from Alicia in our apartment, and at night I would just cry on the floor of the kitchen, and I would never talk to her about it, because if I talked to her about it, that meant I was losing control of what I was feeling. And so I'm at a place now where I know that Jesus has his hand on his back, and he's telling me it's time to let go. Now I'm going to walk through a door where I have to leave this person behind me on the other side. It's really painful, super heartbreaking. It's almost as if Jesus is at a place where he's forcing me to do this. And sometimes we lose someone physically, like my grandpa, and then other times we lose someone because of the choices they make. And that is so hard. And I wonder where we're placing our confidence at these times. At this time, and at Elijah's time with these incredible miracles, and at my time with my high school youth pastor, I was placing all my confidence in who I was and the value of myself and what he told me about me, what our relationship meant to me. And in Elijah's moment, when the fire fades and there's no more guarantees and he's faced against this evil king and queen who want to kill him, I put myself in Elijah's shoes and I just wonder, what are the thoughts he's having when there's no more guarantees? That his life is maybe coming to an end. Maybe he's going to end up like the prophets that were massacred before him. And then he might think, what if my triumph is over? And maybe he realizes that he doesn't have control of that situation, but he thought he had control of those miracles. So he runs. And so how do we live this out in our day-to-day life? How do we stay to focus on God in our times of overwhelm where we're trying to control everything around us or we're walking into a place of unknown? What do we do? And I think the best thing we can do first is when we're overwhelmed is give up on controlling what's overwhelming us. Relying on God is the first thing. Rely on God. We fear trusting in faith alone. Relying on God calls us to relish the things that we don't have control over. It calls us to trust the process and celebrate the journey and look back at the times that he did show up, the times that he did provide. When Alicia and I came out here, we had to celebrate the journey, and now anytime we go back to Trail, we celebrate where we've come from and the tears that were shed and the times we were hurting and the times we were broken and the times I had to call my brother to get some propane to cook some ramen. And then we look back and we're like, this was a pretty amazing thing that God blessed us with. That we could drive across country, just the two of us, live in a place, live in the mountains and hike our dog through the mountains and wade into the Rogue and watch salmon spawn and all these things. This is pretty amazing. And then most importantly, it gave us a true appreciation and understanding of how God provides, how he shows up when we rely on him. And then it strengthened us. It strengthened our marriage, strengthened our relationship with each other, with God. Maybe it wasn't fiscally or financially, but it was what we needed. So we have to let God meet us where we're at. Let God meet you where you're at. When I think back to the moment in Elijah's story where God meets him at the cave and says, "What are you doing here?" I also think of another story in Exodus where God meets Moses at the burning bush and he tells Moses that he has to go. And if you know those stories, they're a little bit different. One is a whisper in 1 Kings, and the other one is more of a shout when he tells Moses to go. And when I think of that story, I think, why in those two moments of feeling overwhelmed, of being nervous, stressed, or anxious, or scared, why did God react so differently? Why was there a whisper, and why was there a booming voice? One sec, sorry. Just forget this part, okay? It's because God meets us where we need to be met. In Moses' doubt and resilience, God was very stern. God was very direct in telling him that you need to go. It was a confident reassurance. In Elijah's fear and terror and lack of control, God was very gentle and compassionate and encouraging with grace and quiet words to let Elijah know that there was nothing to be afraid of. In two moments, two men trying to regain control are met with God, and what do? They concede control, and they let God meet them where they need to be met. When I first heard this story, when I first thought of this moment, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I was in that moment where I was broken and hurting over my high school youth pastor. I used to think God would say, "What are you doing here, Grant?" But in a very disappointed way, almost ashamed. "What are you doing here, Grant? You're a Christian. You trust me. You know me. You should be over this by now. You should be okay with this by now. What are you doing here? This is pathetic," or something. And then now, as I've studied this story more, as I've prayed on this story more, as I prepared for this message, I realized that in reality, when God says that to Elijah, and quite frankly to all of us, it isn't disappointment or shame or anger or frustration. It's a call. When he said it to me, it was, what are you doing here, Grant? What are you doing here when you have me, your father, when you can hide in me, when you can run to me, you can fall into me, you have me because I love you. And it changes things when we think about it from God as a father, as a provider, and his character. So in those moments of feeling overwhelmed and trying to control, when you think you need a shout, but you actually need a whisper, when you think you need a whisper, but you actually need a booming voice, or when you think you need God, but in reality, you need people, let God meet you where you need to be met, where you're at. And the next thing is release to God. We really fear releasing control. We fear being vulnerable. But the thing I want to say is really relish what you can relinquish. Celebrate that we don't have to have all the answers. How nice is it to realize that we don't have to know everything. We don't have to control everything. We want to, and we try to, but we don't have to. That's amazing. We weren't designed to. We're human. And so, just like in Elijah's story, if we can learn from Elijah, if we can learn from Moses, if we can learn from Jesus, when we really let go, when we really relinquish, we're going to be met with the answers we need. Love and grace, compassion, or sometimes the things that we don't even expect at all. So let God, just like in our soap analogy, let go of control, release to God, and let him meet you where you need to be met. Sometimes releasing is simply just showing our cards of pain. For me, releasing to God right now in this moment, this overwhelming moment of entering fatherhood and parenthood, is realizing and speaking out loud to God, to you, to Alicia, how afraid I am of being a dad without my grandpa in this world. Being a dad without this person, my high school youth pastor, who was everything to me. All the answers, all the guidance, all the direction. And I'm really afraid of that. But when I sit back and I release control, I see God speak to me. In Isaiah, there's this thing that God writes and he says to us, and I really love it. He says that when there's a swarm of darkness, of evil, God will rise up a standard. And when I release control and I think about those fears, I realize that God has already risen up plenty of standards in my life. I have a great dad and a great older brother who's walking through fatherhood right now, and he's just a few years ahead of me. I have friends and family and parents, youth parents that give me advice all the time, not just like because they think they're the best, but because they truly care about Alicia and I, and they've been there. And so recognize and release and find where God will rise up that standard in your life. And so then the third thing is rest in God. We truly fear being still with God, but it can be so very powerful in our relationship with Him. Find a time to be in a place and be still. Right now, Alicia and I we decided we're going to learn German on Duolingo. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's this free app that'll teach you a language. It's really cool. And their slogan, every time you open the app, they pop up with a slogan that says, 15 minutes a day can teach you an entire language. What can 15 minutes of social media do? And when I was thinking about that, I was like, these people really don't like social media. But actually what I thought was, if 15 minutes a day can teach me an entire language, what can 5 minutes a day of being still with God do for me? What can it do for my faith? So what are you worried about? What is overwhelming you? And how can you give 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to God with the things that are overwhelming you? With the things you're worried about? And how can you truly speak those things out? One of the greatest pieces of advice I got from a faith mentor once was to speak out audibly to God the things that are ailing you. To talk to Him as if He's sitting right in front of you, audibly. It's important for ourselves, for our relationship with God, our relationship within our communities, to be still in God's presence, to be still with each other. There's times when I finally admitted and was vulnerable with Alicia, there were times where she would simply sit with me and be quiet when I would just cry about the things that were hurting me. And so what could happen if we did that with God? Just every day. Remind yourself of God's presence and let go of the things that you're trying to hold on to with your human hands instead of giving it to God's perfect hands. And so as we go about our week and our times of overwhelm, I would like to challenge us to go through this thought pattern in our head. Because God is, I will be still. Recognize God's presence everywhere. Try to really lean into His presence. Try to be still in it when you can. Because God is, I will rely on God. Trust His grace. Count your blessings. Look back and celebrate the journey. And then the third one again, because God is, I will release control and I will rejoice. Be vulnerable, be content, and know that God is on our side. So the worship team is going to come up. We're going to get ready to start communion. We're going to close out the service with a worship song that I asked the worship team to do for us called Jireh. And so back in Genesis, Abraham goes to sacrifice his son Isaac on this holy mountain. And before he sacrifices him, God sends out a ram. And so Abraham names this mountain Jireh, Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Jireh. And the name simply means the Lord will provide. So in the times of feeling overwhelmed and the times of trying to control and the times of being afraid and being stressed, remind yourself of Jireh. Those are the words we need to hear, that the Lord will provide. And so we're going to sing this song today because this song and the lyrics from it really connect that for me. And I hope that they do the same for you. And so that's it for me.